So tonight I'm really excited to do another one of our spiritual entrepreneur interviews, and this week I'm looking forward to doing it with one of the leading thought leaders in the whole field of spiritual entrepreneurism. Just by way of background, spiritual entrepreneurism is something that we at Church of the Holy City have really been leading on and really pushing forth as an idea that it includes overcoming the divide between your inner life and your outer life, being both a good person and then developing what you need to do in the world. And Sheri has not only been doing pioneering the idea, she's also the CEO of a business, Indigo Education Company, and I wanted just to get her insights on what this concept means, because we talk a lot about it. We're planning a conference on this here at the church in the fall, and just to get to know her better as well. So Sheri, thanks for joining us here in Washington, D.C. at Church of the Holy City. And I just wanted to start, I guess the first question I wanted to ask you, I would call it like a spiritual biography, but what is your background? What were you raised? How did you end up here? You know, just in general, spiritually.
Yeah, I grew up.
Give you this.
Thanks. I really grew up in Michigan, in rural Midwest, very Protestant. We moved a lot, so I had a lot of different influences from different kinds of churches: Methodist, Baptist, non-denominational, Pentecostal. We also went to a lot of Bible schools. So grew up quite traditional religious, and then in college, I went to college here in DC, American University, and wanted something a little more exciting, passionate. You want to do something for God, and ended up joining a pretty intense legalistic evangelical church that a lot of people would say is a cult. There's a lot of articles on it. I won't say the name, but that was a difficult experience for me. I ended up marrying a guy from the church who was 9 years my senior when I was 22, because they do a lot of like semi-arranged marriages in the church.
That's intense.
And that whole experience ended up being very painful and not what I expected. And then I ended up leaving my husband and the church and God pretty much when I was 24. And
so you were at that point, you're sort of done with religion.
Not done with God, but just done with any sort of organized religion. Yeah, and moved to Vail, Colorado, and really pursued a lot of different things. Lived a pretty secular lifestyle, but also very interesting, life.
Secular lifestyles can be interesting.
Yeah, it was fascinating. It was great. I loved it, and met my current husband when I was 32, and really decided to kind of like incorporate all the different things I learned and move back into some sort of Christian framework, and have been on a unique journey since then.
That's awesome. So, and then how did you hear about this church, the Swedenborgian religion, or Swedenborgian church? Yeah,
I was actually working with some energy healers who aren't even part of the Swedenborgian church, but they know of Swedenborg and thought that I would be interested, and introduced me to Van Duzen's book, The Presence of Other Worlds, which was so exciting. I was like, how have I never heard of this? How have I never heard of this guy? This is so fascinating. This makes so much of my life make sense, and so much of Christianity makes sense. And then some people completely unrelated to that, I was telling them about the Van Duzen book, and they said, oh, there are Swedenborg churches. Do you know this? And we know the pastor of the church in DC, and they're on Zoom right now because it's the pandemic. And I was like, wow, can you introduce me? So that's how we met.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. Okay, next question. So that's a fascinating background, and you call yourself a spiritual entrepreneur. You're working on, you've taken courses, you've done cohorts, you've done curriculum on it. So what is your definition of this new concept? Because we all know what an entrepreneur is. It's kind of a business person, creative, always doing new things, the startup culture. Yeah. And we kind of know what spiritual is, and we kind of think like a monk, going off into the woods, prayer, maybe church. So we know what spiritual is, and we know what entrepreneurs, they don't really necessarily fit together. Yeah. So what is your take on this concept?
Well, I've really struggled with trying to define this too narrowly, because I feel like things that are really important and spiritual, you need language to explore them, but also language really limits it. So I've come up with two definitions that
Okay.
I'm writing a book on this right now, and the two definitions that I use in the book is, one is someone who starts an entity or an organization or business that evolves human consciousness, or somebody whose idea or work in the world is about revealing the kingdom of heaven on earth.
Okay. So what if, going along with that idea of what spiritual is, someone could say, helping the poor, just very traditionally good nonprofit-like things, or
Yeah.
a social enterprise
Yeah.
that feeds people. How would that be different than a spiritual entrepreneur, or would that be a spiritual entrepreneur?
Well, I think most people in that realm, like the nonprofit realm or the social entrepreneurship realm, I think if they heard the word spiritual entrepreneur, which I did when you told me about the word, it totally in my life made sense to me. I think when a lot of them hear that, some of them will say, I'm a spiritual entrepreneur, but I think the big difference is they include the soul and the spiritual path and the spiritual development of who they are and their employees as part of their path. And it's not just about working in this world, it's also about like working in tandem with the spiritual world to do kind of like what the scripture said, store up your treasures in heaven. And I think that's a big difference. There's like an explicit space for the soul.
So a lot of people, entrepreneurism is kind of a hot commodity among a lot of younger people. Shark Tank
Yeah.
and social entrepreneur competitions, of which I've been part of many.
Yeah.
So it's a very popular field, entrepreneurism. But I think we're also at a point in our culture where we're kind of, many of us are kind of questioning traditional capitalism, or just
Yeah.
business for business sake,
Yep.
or everything can be measured, or you're just
Yeah.
a commodity.
Yep.
Everything is transactional.
Yes.
We're in DC. DC is a very transactional city,
Yes.
where you're as interesting to me as what I can get from you. So none of that is really spiritual
No.
very much, right?
No. Yeah.
So do you get pushback from people who on the spiritual side say, like, entrepreneur is like all the things I'm against?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And I think the whole way entrepreneurship is set up, like as you said, Shark Tank, and even social entrepreneurship pitch competitions, like they're based, I talk about this, they're based on the principles of exclusivity,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
Which is like the opposite of God's
Can you
inclusivity.
can you get into the
the
contest?
club.
Can you get to the money?
That's right. Ranking and sorting. So like, who's the best pitch? Who's the best thing?
Right.
Who can make the most money?
Right.
And really money. Money is the currency, right? Where I feel like in the spiritual entrepreneurship, it's about inclusivity, right? Instead of exclusivity. It's about abundance or enoughness. I talk about how it's this idea that who we are is enough, like what you're creating is enough. So you might be creating an enterprise that helps a few poor people, or you might be creating the next billion-dollar company, but not for yourself, to serve others. And also this idea of the currency is love instead of money.
Right. So, and then the challenge is that I always joke, I can't go to the grocery store and do the checkout and say, hey, I'm a minister and I'm doing social good stuff. Can I just get this for free? No.
Yeah.
Like, we all have to have cash.
Yeah.
And younger people particularly are more and more strapped for
They are.
cash. It's
They
really
are.
expensive to live in cities.
It is.
It's really expensive to buy groceries. It's really expensive right now, of course, with fuel. I mean, there's just so many expenses and struggles. A lot of younger people are even, saying, hey, look, it makes more sense for me to stay at home longer. We're seeing more of that happening. And in that atmosphere, we have other people who are just making fortunes.
Yeah.
So what you mentioned, like, what's enough? What do you have an answer to that? Like, what's enough?
I think it depends on the person. I think that God always seems to work with people on a very individual basis,
Yes.
especially spiritual entrepreneurs.
Right.
And so I feel like what's enough is very different. And I lend it to the manna system. When the Israelites were walking through the desert,
Yeah.
God would rain down the manna for them to eat, and they would only be able to collect what they could collect that day. And I think what God gives us spiritual entrepreneurs as manna is quite different depending on what he's teaching us or what we're all about in the world.
So it's individual. So let me put you on the spot in the sense, if you were talking to, I know you travel in some of these circles with your entrepreneurial,
Yeah.
that was a network we were connected to, was a
Yeah.
wealthy network.
Yeah.
Do you ever just say to them, give away you have too much?
Oh.
Or do you think that, or do you say that, or how do you feel about that? I mean, these are people I'm
Yeah.
talking who have
Yeah.
hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
What do you feel like?
I feel like it's we're just given money to basically give it away, right? We
Right.
don't own it. We don't own anything anyway. God owns everything. So what do you do with the money? So that's part of the spiritual entrepreneur framework, right? Instead of being like, I need to have a transaction, I need to have a very specific reason to give money. What if some of these wealthy people gave because they felt in their heart that's what they should give to?
Right.
It's not about strings. It's not about tax rebates. It's about, I feel compelled to like be part of this ministry, and it could be a lot of different things, and just giving freely from that kind of heart. Again, does this grow love? Does this grow God's kingdom on earth? And then that's the return. And maybe there's money there and maybe there isn't, but that's not the focus. The focus shifts.
So I'm still sticking on this entrepreneur thing because it has such a, particularly for younger people, it can cut both ways. Do you think that having too much money is a spiritual burden?
Absolutely. And
Okay.
Mother Teresa said that as well.
Yeah,
She's one of the famous people.
I think Jesus said, "Eye of a needle,
Yeah.
camel."
It
So I
is a
mean,
burden.
so I can look at my frustration of not making the money that I want to make in my life as a blessing.
Yeah.
Probably,
Absolutely.
Because I think Swedenborg somewhere even says that we're protected from getting too much if we're on a spiritual path.
Yes.
That would distract us from our faith.
Yeah.
So I do find you and I have been at a number of conferences with the super wealthy.
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
And we're not super wealthy.
No.
And I don't want to be jealous, but a part of me probably is, to be honest. But at the same time, it's not a really powerful spiritual energy in those spaces.
No, absolutely
It's a very
not.
negative energy.
It's difficult.
Okay, so I thank you for exploring the entrepreneur side from the spiritual side. Now, can I flip with you a little bit and ask about the spiritual side?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so now I'm going to approach it now from my entrepreneurial world and the numbers guys, and I work in an accounting firm, and they measure everything, and that's why I need their help because I can't count. So from their side, they look at spiritual and they say, Sheri, Rich, you have good intentions. You're a lovely person, but you're not having any impact in the world. You come and you pray in your small little groups, and you talk to each other and you read the Bible, and I'm out there building things. I'm making buildings. I'm creating jobs. I'm creating huge corporations. And yeah, some of the jobs might be menial, but I'm creating healthcare and systems. And so I'm the entrepreneur. I'm doing things. And the spiritual people are kind of navel-gazing in their own little world, having very little impact, and they're always begging for money. How would you respond to that, like cartoon a little bit, but have you ever experienced that from the more entrepreneurial world looking at spiritual?
Yeah, I feel like the entrepreneurial world doesn't actually talk about the spiritual world very much. What I do hear a lot is, well, why don't you just make your millions and then you'll have all the money you need to be spiritual, right?
So
It really doesn't work that way.
And then just be charitable.
Exactly.
Spiritual is charitable.
Exactly, and it really doesn't, I don't feel like the path of the spiritual entrepreneur is that, right? Because then you're like totally diverting your focus. You're saying, okay, I'm gonna go basically worship this idol so that once this idol has given me what I want, then now I can go worship God better or something. So it's like a very backwards way of thinking about it.
So what I'm hearing from you is what you've done, and you've done this with your company, it's an integration.
Yes.
Might be the right word.
Yeah,
You've
totally
taken
integrated.
spiritual, which of course in our traditions, you can't be spiritual if you're not active in the world. So that's a kind of a false definition of spiritual. Like if you say you're spiritual and you're not doing something good in the world, you're not spiritual, you're in your head. The flip side is you're also redefining what entrepreneur and what money stands. Can I ask more of a concrete question, like in the business world that you're in? Okay, so now, Sheri, you need money to get your business going.
Yeah, you do.
And you might need an investor.
Yes.
How do you approach that if you know?
Yeah. So I think we need new ways of investing, and I think we need to think about investing differently, and that's what I'm hoping. One of the things that happens with the spiritual entrepreneurship conversation with the church and with the book is thinking about what are some new ways of investing, because that way of investing that's about like a financial return would not be a spiritual capital investor, right?
Right.
Okay, maybe there does need to be money involved, but that shouldn't be the goal.
Right.
So I think we need to think about new ways. I love actually Mackenzie Scott, and I use her as an example. Now she's doing philanthropy in a different way, but you could do investment the same way. The only reason why people are so focused on philanthropy is the tax code. But
Exactly.
the tax code is going to change someday anyway. It's outdated.
Right.
So if we think about it from like moving capital towards things that, evolve humanity, like why wouldn't we want to do that? And so then the measure of what matters in that framework is very different. And we could get people like a lot of these wealthy young folks, instead of thinking about it from a traditional investment way, we need a spiritual investment kind of way of thinking, which is more like, what does your heart tell you? What is God telling you?
Okay.
It's a very different way of thinking.
It's a very different way of thinking, and
people are moving in that
Yeah,
direction. I mean, Mackenzie's a good example.
Yeah. So you're hoping that we'll redefine entrepreneurism and philanthropy, and the people with wealth will. But now I'm going to put you in the real world because you're doing business now.
Yeah.
In this world.
I am.
So how do you do you have to get investors, or do you just figure out other ways? How do you navigate that world of money now?
So I started out getting investors,
Yeah.
and doing it more the traditional way, and
Okay.
it gave me a lot of case studies, but it really wasn't a good fit. I mean, we did raise almost $1 million in
Okay.
capital, so
you've gone that route.
not a ton, but not a little, and God bless them, because we wouldn't have a company without them. And also now we've made our company completely self-sustainable, and it's just way better for me energetically. And moving forward, I'm not totally opposed to capital, but I definitely want more aligned capital. And I think I'm hoping there is going to be space for that if we need it.
So if you do have to get more capital, you're looking for that spiritual entrepreneur mentality, someone
Yes.
who's looking for doing good in the world. And you said that now that you have funds,
Yes, we have customers,
you
so
have
we have
customers,
sales.
so you have sales.
Yeah, so we can sustain ourselves.
It's a much better energy. I'm guessing, but I want you to tell me if I'm right. Part of the change in energy is you're not chasing.
Exactly.
There's
Yes.
whenever you're an entrepreneur, you're constantly chasing people with money.
Yeah.
And you're also having to behave around them a certain way.
Exactly.
It
They
may not be
expect a certain way.
They expect a certain way, and so even their relationships are not really.
No.
Yeah.
And that's one of the painful things for them. I mean, that's what's painful. They're trapped in their own prison.
Right.
Or of their own making, because of the whole system. They're also imprisoned by that system, and
Yeah.
it makes their lives more painful and difficult, and their
Who really
relationships
cares
less
about
close.
me?
Exactly.
You tell me. The joke is that I've certainly been in these competitions. I'm not a wealthy person. I'm not an investor, but I've been in those circles, and I've never had more compliments on my shoes, my shirt, the way I comb my hair from these younger, because that's what they've learned to do, particularly
Yeah.
with older men. And a lot of this is also racial. I mean, I see a lot of white guys approaching white guys,
Yes.
getting money. It's almost
That's
a bro
where all
culture.
the money is. Oh, that's
And
very
it's
huge.
harder for women. And we see the statistics around people of color, so it also has a whole
Yeah.
all that going on.
Less than
too.
2% of venture capital is going to people of
Right.
color. Yeah.
So that's a whole other. That's another another way it's not really equitable. So thank you for exploring the idea of this. You took us and helped us understand how we could understand the spiritual. We could also understand the entrepreneurial. Can you tell me now, in very concrete terms, you created a company. Tell me about Indigo. How did you start it? What does it do? And then I want to get to what makes it a spiritual entrepreneur entity.
So I started Indigo in 2013,
Mm-hmm.
really with the intention, this belief that the current education system wasn't serving our students and helping them feel like intrinsically valuable. So from the scripture reading today with Swedenborg, this idea of uses, this idea that every human being was created for a purpose, and that they have a use, and that use serves others, right? That's not really part of the education system. The education system is do what you're told, do what you say, fit in, check all these boxes, and then somehow magically you're going to be successful. And that model never really worked at any equitable state, but it did work for certain segments of society, but now it just doesn't work for anybody. And so I was like, okay, what if we brought the humanity into education? So I started with an assessment, like a personality kind of assessment, and workshops and trainings for teachers. And so really Indigo is about helping people see themselves who they are in heaven's, in God's eyes, right?
Right.
Without using the word God, because we're in public schools. And,
Sure.
and we're in public schools in 30 states now. We've worked with, like 150,000 students. And
Wow.
we've
That's a lot.
just pivoted towards a free site. Anyone can check it out, indigopathway.com, for job seekers. So we have a mini version of our assessment. And again, it's for anybody, like anybody who's looking for a more fulfilling use.
Yeah.
How do you know yourself, and how do you find a job that aligns with your gifts? And that's what we're all about.
So that's beautiful. It sounds to me like you're helping young people identify their greatest purpose, the way they can be useful. And it's saying to them that you, as you are, are valuable.
Yeah, exactly.
Regardless of like if you're good at math, you're not good at science,
Exactly.
your grades aren't good, you have, these problems at home, you might have some disciplinary, but you're created in the image of God.
Exactly.
God loves you, and there's something special about you, and
Exactly.
it shows through that's fascinating. That's really a great company, and I'm assuming that from what you just said, you have to translate into the secular society, because we first of all, it's respectful. It's not even church and state. It's like, you want to be respectful of people of no faith, of many faiths.
Yes.
You certainly don't want to push a faith,
Right.
which is great with the Swedenborgian thing, because we don't push a faith. But I'm just curious, how do you describe meaning, purpose, being useful in the world? These are all kind of spiritual, if not philosophical, comments and concepts, but they're not really what we're looking for. They have, in the education system, which grew out of the industrial age, was very much about producing people who could work in the system.
Right.
So that's a whole different. It is kind of a cog in a machine. Find your place, do this, get a good education.
Yeah.
You'll definitely get a good job. You'll have enough money to get a loan, to get a house,
Right.
to get into the yeah.
Which you won't anymore.
Right, which you won't. So, how do you translate?
So we do use the word purpose. I mean, I
Use the word
feel
purpose?
like the consciousness of society overall, even secular society, is interested in purpose. So we do use the word purpose. But the
Okay.
way that we translate from an education standpoint is we have measures. It's tricky because measuring humans is a tricky thing, but we have measures in the sense of all of the numbers are good, right? So like, how does this student, what kind of behavioral styles do they have? What kind of motivators do they have? What skills do they have? And in trying to neutralize some of the inherent biases, like for example, entrepreneurial students are biased against in the system. We already know students of certain color are biased against, but if they're entrepreneurial, if their behaviors and motivators are entrepreneurial, automatically teachers are like, you're bad, you're not good. And if they're of color or from a poor area, then it's even worse of a stigma. And so instead of looking at kids from this lens of, you're not like me, you don't value the same things I value, it's like, oh, that kid's actually just different from me and it has value in this way. And we can describe it with numbers and data, and the education system can kind of hook onto that, and it's pretty transformative.
That's amazing. I would say my experience, there were always teachers who were looking for the odd kid or the special kid or me. I mean, I had teachers kind of pulled me out and said, I think you're really... So they were looking in that system and kind of telling you. I don't know, did you ever get affirmed by I had like at various levels, different people kind of affirmed. You might be outside of how everybody else is, but did you ever get any of that growing up?
Well, I was the opposite, because I was outside of everybody, but I hid it.
Okay.
And it caused great emotional pain and a great expense of my self-esteem. So I excelled in the system by like basically killing my own soul and my own personality to do what I was told, because I wanted out of, we weren't in poverty, but we were in lower middle class and rural, and I wanted out. So
Yeah.
I bought into the system.
Well, you gamed the system to get to survive,
system
essentially.
to survive.
Survival skills.
Yeah. So, but it was so damaging to my self-esteem because I was getting praised for things that I knew wasn't actually me. So I didn't know who I was, and I didn't think who I was had any value or had any purpose in the world.
And it seems to me that the great spiritual entrepreneur ideas come out of pain, out of a struggle, something that we suffered at some level. We don't want to have other people a next generation to suffer. Is that fair?
Absolutely. Pain is one of the greatest teachers and the greatest motivators.
Yeah, and if it can be shifted for good, that's such a spiritual principle.
It is.
Before we close out, you've got a book about spiritual entrepreneurs. Do you have a title? Is it like a locked-in title?
Yeah, it's just called Spiritual Entrepreneurship,
Yeah.
Raw Reflections of a Female CEO.
And can you, anything that you want to share about that? Because when is it coming out, for example?
It's coming out this year. I don't know exactly when. It's almost done.
We'll do a book party here, a lunch.
Yay, that'd be great. Maybe in the fall. And so I think the real difference between my book and I think a lot of other books, there's not a lot of books yet on spiritual entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
It's been coming out slowly. But the difference is I feel like all these business books or, books on entrepreneurs is about they've already made it. They've made $1 bazillion and now they're giving advice but there's hardly any books that are about like the struggle, about the pain, right? About how confusing it is. And as a spiritual entrepreneur, especially as you said, because the system's so opposite, it's very confusing and complicated. So mine, that's why I call it raw reflections. It's about like, hey, I don't have the answers. I'm not the expert. I'm a practitioner. And here's what I've learned in my practice, and I want to share it with you so you don't feel crazy. And maybe there's some other perspectives to explore collectively together.
Awesome. I think we should do a Sunday sermon on that when it comes out.
Okay, that'd be fun.
Well, this has been great. Thank you so much for going
you.
such in depth on this with me. I appreciate it. And we'll open it up to discussion during the chat time after worship. So thank you.